Good morning. This is Rebecca Smith Aldridge, the Mid-Hudson Library System's Coordinator for Library Sustainability and the 2018 Chair of the NYLA Legislative Committee. Today I'm joined by Jeremy Johansson, the Executive Director of the New York Library Association. Hey, Jeremy.
Good morning, everybody.
So today our goal is to make sure everyone feels comfortable and confident about speaking up on behalf of library aid and library legislative issues as we move into the high season for advocating for libraries at the state level here in 2018. There's a lot going on, so we appreciate you taking the time to learn more about what's going on and to get on the same page with other library advocates so we're all delivering a singular, strong message about why it's important to invest in libraries in the future. As you guys know, the governor has rolled back the legislative ads we financially received last year, which puts us in an unfortunate position and pretty much an uphill battle to get the word out and to help us see the gains we need to receive in terms of the finances that libraries need to move forward. So today our goal is really to cover the basics. We want to take a look at, the what, the why, the how, and the who to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, where the moving pieces are, where our leverage points are, and how to deliver messages that really stick with people and will have an impact. So getting started here today, the reason we're all here on this call today is thanks to the New York Library Association. And those of you who have memorized the tagline know that NYLA is the voice of the library community. But the library community needs to amplify that voice. And our voice is stronger when we speak together. So when we do things like go to Albany together on February 28th, and we deliver the same message over and over again, that libraries are education, that libraries are for everyone, that's when we start to have a measurable impact on how legislators understand why their constituents need state legislators to invest in libraries. So again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to make your life a little easier today. So those of you know that advocacy season runs from January to June intensely, and Advocacy Day is just one day out of those 6 months. So why are we just doing an Advocacy Day briefing? The truth is we've hooked you in here and we're lying to you. We're actually going to talk to you about the whole span of advocacy activities that needs to be going on. So by the time we get to Library Advocacy Day in just 2 short weeks, we really have made an impression on people before we've even arrived, because that's how we do things here in New York. So Jeremy, why don't you lay it out for us? Explain to everyone the timeline we're dealing with and where the really critical moments are in this schedule.
Absolutely. And as Rebecca pointed out, the New York State Legislature gathers each year for a session that runs from January to June, roughly. And the budgetary process, while it truthfully never ends, there's always some conversation happening, but the process begins in earnest in January. The governor delivers, first off, his State of the State address, where he provides an update on the state, and then releases his executive budget. And that comes out in January. And it's the starting point of the budget conversation, where he is laying out his vision for the operating budget for the state for the coming year. That goes out, and then there's some time where both the Senate and the Assembly take a crack at it, and they all have to come to terms and agreement on what the revenue forecast looks like, how much money we're going to have coming in through taxes and all the other sources of income that come to the state. There's a little bit of negotiation and finagling about agreeing of just how much money we have to work with, and then they also each put out their own budget. The proposal. So you've got the Senate and the Assembly and the governor each creating their own budget document. And this is what leads to that familiar phrase, the 3 men in a room. If you've been in New York for any time, you've heard that thrown around budget season. Those individual budgets are all coming out in the first part of March. They're due by March 15th. And so the reason that we are targeting February 28th as our advocacy day is that that's when they really settle down in earnest to begin crafting their one House bills. We know that the governor has not treated us as we would have hoped and has removed the additional funding that was placed in the budget for libraries last year, the $4 million that the legislature added over his proposal last year of 91.6, and he rolled back to 91.6 when he put forward this year's proposal. So just like every good high school student, the members of the legislature really are not focused right now because they're about to go out on on break for President's Week. And as soon as they come back, first thing, the first week when they're back and ready to really settle down and tackle this project is when we're going to converge on Albany and let them know that it's the time to focus on making sure that they include restoration of that funding at a minimum and hopefully even better than that. And that will keep us busy. We have seen roughly on-time budgets. This would be the 7th consecutive budget that would come close to hitting its April 1st legally required deadline. And then the remainder of the session, from the time that the budget is settled till they convene the session in the end of June, is focused on policy. But our primary focus right now is ensuring that the libraries get every bit of resources that they need, and we'll be focusing that on February 28th.
So Jeremy, talk to us a little bit about the right actions to be taking when in that schedule you just laid out for us.
Sure thing. And it's a little bit of everything all the time. But first off, we've already talked about Advocacy Day a little bit, but we'll hit that. But right now, there's actions that you can be taking, and that's I'm sure you've seen. Nyla's been banging the drum for a couple of weeks now. We have an online advocacy center that makes it just super simple for you to take action. We like to use the phrase "give 2 clicks" because that's just about all it takes. You click on the link, you put in your name and address, and our system figures out who your elected officials are, as well as we've carefully hand-selected a couple other key leaders to send letters to so that they get a copy of everyone's letter. And we've written a letter for you. You don't have to take time trying to figure out exactly what to say. The letter's all populated and ready to go. You just click through, hit the button a couple times, and away it goes to Albany. And that's something that you can help us out with by sharing that around as well. We've also, thanks to the leadership in Mid-Hudson, rolled out the Real People, Real Dollars campaign that was started there statewide now. So there's resources on the NYLA website to help you encourage your patrons to use the library value calculator and see just how much money their usage of their library is saving them against what the retail costs might have been. And we'll tell you that as insiders, we'll let you know that the background to this is also that if you have a patron who is willing to spend 15 minutes with you to figure out what their savings were and print out a piece of paper and write the number down nice and big and let you take their picture, man, they are teed up. They are right there to the final tap in on that is to get them to put their name and address into the system and sign them up as a library advocate so they can send a letter in through the online advocacy center as well. The greatest showing of force that we have all year is February 28th when everybody converges on Albany. But there's endless opportunities to be engaged with your elected officials. Every single one of them has a district office back much closer to home for you than Albany. And you can make appointments to go and see them at their district offices. And there's just an endless array of opportunities to continue to harangue them through social media. So yeah, it's something to do all the time.
Hey, Jeremy, we got a question in the chat box from Stuart, who's on our board here at Mid-Hudson. He's asking about letters to the editor of our local papers. What do you think?
I have been so pleased and excited. We have put out a template letter to the editor that we posted to the website and shared that around through some of the library systems, and asked the library directors around the state to share that potentially with a board member. And we've seen at least 15 times where people either use that template or use that as a springboard to write their own letter. But those letters to the editor are just tremendously impactful. It's a way for us to get what's referred to as earned media. We're getting a placement in the paper that we didn't have to purchase. It's drawing attention to the issue of library funding. And if people leave it in the template version, the closing of that includes the URL nyla.org/advocacy, driving even more sympathizers to our cause. So it's been fantastic, and I really appreciate everyone who has helped to spread that around.
So Jeremy jokingly used the word haranguing our legislators, but each of these activities is designed to really capture the attention of not only our legislators, but their constituents. We're guessing that many of you feel like we do, that libraries are pretty darn important. So one of the things we want to emphasize today, and we're going to talk a little more about this in a minute, is why are we doing all of this? There needs to be a why behind it, and we all need to passionately speak about the why behind what we are doing as we speak with this one voice coming out of the library community and going into Albany and speaking to legislators who, some of which have familiarity with our libraries and other whom have not thought about libraries in quite some time. So part of your homework between now and Advocacy Day, or now when you write your letters, is to get really good at talking about why libraries are education, libraries are everyone, and libraries are empowerment engines. We know libraries are education. The state knows the Board of Regents knows we are education. The governor, not so much, evidently. So when we talk about the fact that we are chartered by the Board of Regents, we report to the state library, which is overseen by the state education department, that squarely puts us in the infrastructure of the education world in New York State. But the truth is we are educators. We are educating our communities on a wide variety of topics, and making sure we have that at the center of our messaging is quite critical. These days, it's also very important to emphasize that libraries are for everyone. Regardless of what your background is, what your educational level is, or how much money you make, you are welcome to come through our doors and make your life or your family's life better. So emphasizing again that we represent all New Yorkers, not just those that happen to know we exist, but everyone benefits from libraries. So again, finding those stories, those heart-wrenching stories that speak to these talking points are incredibly important to connect with our legislators. So we're introducing some of these points early in our webinar today so you can start mulling them over. But again, this will be how effective you are as an advocate. Do you know when to deliver these messages and what you're going to say, and are you delivering them to the right people? So the last talking point there is something you might not have seen before, but something we're kind of toying with here at Mid-Hudson. We thought we would share it. The libraries are empowerment engines. Everything we do is generating empowerment for those that we serve, allowing families to go further with their children's education, or helping people seeking jobs go further in those searches. So if you really think about libraries as that platform to help boost people up and do great things on their own behalf and on behalf of their family and neighborhoods, this is something that I think if we get better at talking about could really inspire people to invest more in libraries, both locally and at the state level. So just some food for thought as you start crunching on all of the issues that we're talking about here today. So when we talk about state aid for libraries, it's a monster bucket of stuff. A lot of people just think there's money that comes to libraries and systems, but the truth is there's a lot of what they call categorical aid that's impacted by state aid for libraries. So as you look at this kind of what might seem like a very long list of items that go where the state aid goes to, I bet you'll see a thing here and there that might really hit home and close to home for not only you or people that you serve in your communities. Things like the summer reading program, or the hospital and medical library services, or I don't know, state aid for public library construction. That's a pretty big deal here in New York. So we just wanted to put this list in front of you to make sure it's clear that this cut from the governor impacts all types of libraries and all types of library systems. So when you get to Albany, you're not just going to be seeing your peers from your system. You're going to be seeing libraries of all shapes and sizes and all types throughout New York banding together to deliver this message. And we welcome all types of libraries at our visits because we're delivering a message that libraries are, again, education for everyone and empowerment engines. So Jeremy, can you talk a little bit about how the money is spread across all of these programs?
Well, absolutely, and it's interesting that this list that does seem very long is not even all-inclusive. There's more categorical aid portions of the state library aid formula than are listed here. We like to refer to it as the Plinko system of library aid, that the library aid goes in the top and it has to filter through and sort its way through a whole lot of formulas before it makes its way to these programs. And there's a lot of key and important programs that all need their little piece of the funding that's available. So the cut that the governor has proposed of taking $4 million out of the top of what's going into the pot trickles all the way down and touches every single one of these programs. And it may not be tremendous, but when the pot is small to begin with for some of these programs, even a small cut matters. What's fantastic about the way that this is structured is that it does reach every corner of the state. It ensures access and equity for all New Yorkers by providing services that have evolved over time to meet the needs of the entire state of New York.
So Jeremy, we've talked a couple times about quote unquote the cut. Can you unpack that for us and make sure everyone understands the cut?
Sure. And some of it is a little bit of semantics, and I'm sure that the governor's office would not agree with our way that we present this information. But each year, as I mentioned, the executive budget comes out. The governor puts forward his proposed budget for the operations of the state of New York, and for the past 3 years in a row, he said, I think the right number for library aid is $91.6 million. And each year, the Senate and the Assembly come together, and thanks to the efforts of people like the advocates on the call today, they realize that, no, there's a big outcry and people value their libraries, and we want to make sure that they know that we value them too. So we'll provide some additional funding and have put more money into that pot. And so last year's enacted budget was at $95.6 million, which ended up being exactly where it was the previous year. Again, in this year's executive budget, the governor has rolled back to that $91.6 million. He really thinks that's the right amount of library aid. And what's interesting as well is that his thinking is that he hasn't actually cut anything. This is what he thinks is right, and it's the legislature that's a little more spendy, if you will, that they're a little more willing to be doling out funds. And we were not alone. We were rolled in with a process in which the governor's office removed every penny that the legislature had added to last year's enacted budget. If the governor had just gone through and plowed through the hundreds of pages of the budget just to pick out the library funding, I'm sure we would be even more enraged. But we're in good company that everything was removed. This chart, we've been using this for a few years now, and we keep using it because it really demonstrates a tremendous amount of information in a one-quart jar. The blue line way in the background shows library aid, and it's based on a census-based formula that adjusts every time the census is conducted. Sometimes there's some lag in getting the census reflected in the formula, but that's why you see these sort of steps periodically. We are already starting to have conversations about the 2020 census and what that might mean, because the pundits that I've heard are suggesting that we'll see a decline in population in New York State, which would result in a reduction in what that number is, that 102.6 at the end of the blue line there. The red roller coaster line in the middle shows the actual library aid that has been enacted each year, and you can see it's been a wild ride where we've seen cuts and restorations and cuts again. We were on a pretty solid trajectory for a few years, and now we seem to have stagnated in the last few. So that's that 95.6 that we've been flat the last couple of years. And the green line, which is way up ahead of everything else, really just applies a standard rate of inflation upon the money that was contemplated in 1998 by the members of the legislature. And if we were just to ensure that libraries had the same purchasing power, the same ability to operate with the same value of their dollars, we would be at $132 million. We can't even purchase what we could back in 1998. And if you would, for just a second, let's recognize that that's 20 years ago, and that a majority of the libraries that are receiving this funds didn't have a single computer in the building at that point, and now it's one of the most integral and important services that the libraries provide. So the way that the libraries are functioning have changed, and what they're being asked to deliver has evolved, but the funding is woefully stagnant. Another way to look at this funding issue is what we refer to as the gap chart. And it shows that by falling short of what is stipulated in education law, just a little bit each year has built up over time. So in the last decade, the shortfalls, if you add them all up, we have lost more than an entire year's worth of funding under what is stipulated in education law, $117 million that has not been made available to libraries and has been withheld against what is contemplated in the law.
Jeremy, this chart is so helpful, and it sparked us to do some math here at Mid-Hudson, and we determined that over the course of the past just 10 years, we've lost a third of our purchasing power. So we did the adjustments, the cost of living and inflation rates, and discovered that this kind of flat funding and no growth funding means we've lost 31% of our purchasing power. So as the times change and collection types diversify, and we're all trying to figure out the ebook market and new technology and programs, while we're trying to balance all of that, we're doing so with 30% less purchasing power, which is really ridiculous. When you think about the numbers that we saw come out of the New York State Education Department a few years ago, which indicate that for every $1 invested in library systems and libraries through state aid, we're able to parlay that into $7 worth of services for our communities. So it's kind of insane that a super efficient organization and infrastructure like the library systems here in New York that can have this type of return on investment is being, I think, just damaged year after year by this lack of investment. So when we go in there and we talk about things, we're not looking to whine about this with our legislators, but we are there to make the business case for why libraries are a good investment for the future, and how if they're interested in the future success of New Yorkers, libraries are a great place to be investing money. And oh, by the way, look at what great stewards we are of this money and how much we can springboard this relatively small amount of money on behalf of New Yorkers and amplify the effect of these dollars. So many legislators know this money goes very far, which is why we've seen the legislature come through for us and rolling forward some of the money for our state aid and the major boost we saw in construction aid last year. One of the other big issues we're going to be pushing on this year is construction aid for public libraries. And this is a budgetary issue that we need to discuss early on in our process, because last year we were able to bump up the amount from 14 to 24 million. And again, as Jeremy said, the governor rolled that back. So we're back down to the $14 million number. So Jeremy, I'm going to hand this one over to you because I know you've got the statewide view, even though the photos here are from libraries in my system. And yes, that is the Claverack Library doing programming at the circulation desk because that's all they have access to.
Yeah, the accumulated need that the Division of Library Development has identified through your annual reports that I know you're all done with, but it's letting us know that there's a $1.7 billion accumulated need for maintenance and renovations in our state's libraries. And that bump that we saw both last year and the year before, taking it from $14 million the year before last, it went a $5 million jump to 19, and then last year they had a $10 million, got us all the way to 24. But the governor again really likes that $14 million number and keeps pushing it back there, and has done so again. So we're asking that the legislature look at this number, and we're calling on them to take the number to 30, which certainly wouldn't have been nearly as much of a lift if the governor had left the funding alone. This is capital money, so it's bonded. The state issues bonds against this money, so it's a little different in the way that it functions in the budget. And the funds that go out that support these are matched on a local level based on an economic need of the library, and the system administering the funds determines how those matching requirements are met. But those funds are spent and contractors are hired, people do this work, it returns money into the communities as this work is done, and it becomes a 5-to-1 return on investment of state dollars in economic impact of the projects that are taking place. And it's certainly the deferred maintenance. I think you're all familiar with this, right? Because unless you are fortunate enough to be in one of the beautiful new libraries that have been constructed, you have a lot of stuff that's built up over time when you've been trying to operate your libraries on very thin margins. Nearly half of the state's libraries are over 60 years old. They were built in the 1950s. And another third are at least 30 years old. So we're talking going back to the 1980s. So there's definitely plenty of very old spaces that have a lot of needs. Some of them are just coming right down to life and safety as far as needs for access, and a full quarter of the state's libraries have at least some portion of their space that is not fully accessible to those that are differently abled.
It's a big lift out there. I think it's a pretty easy case to make, and it's important that we have visuals that help make that case. So I know, Jeremy, you and Kelsey issued a call for library horror stories. So if you've got a great photo of your library that demonstrates how it might not be accessible to people who are differently abled, or how it's overcrowded when you try to do programming, or just, crazy things like the picture on the right in Woodstock where there's this massive crack in the wall. I mean, these are important, essential elements of infrastructure in almost every town in the state. So our ability to maintain these buildings and grow them to meet the needs of New Yorkers can't be understated. So go for the heartstrings when you're taking those photos. So just to summarize our budget goals here, we're looking for $100 million for equitable library funding. I think Jeremy made a great case for that. And of course, as always, our fallback position is, absent that, let's start matching the increases they're proposing for education aid, which this year is a 3% increase. Our overall goal is to get onto the same pattern that we see increases to school aid going for libraries. There's no reason to treat libraries different than schools in today's day and age. And again, the number for the state aid for public library construction, luckily the library community got their act together this year, and we're all using the same number. We're all asking for an additional 30, we want the total to be $30 million for library construction. So when we talk about these ads, basically from the executive budget and what we hope to see in the final budget, there's only so much money to go around. So Jeremy, give us the inside track on where that money might come from.
Yeah, the executive budget proposes a New York State budget of roughly $167 billion, and that is a big number. That's a bigger number than I really can conceive of, and so it's very easy to slip into the mindset of, well, good golly, why can't we find $4 million? That's a pocket change in a number that big. The issue is that, just like your home budget or your library's budget, the state budget operates with a finite amount of money available, and it has all these things that it has to do. So just like your home budget, it has to pay its mortgage and its utilities and all these fixed costs. And so when you get down into the pieces of the budget, library aid is included in the what's referred to as the education table. It's the education portion of the budget where things are fought out, and there is a paltry $60 million available overall for that. And then we ended up getting a $4 million piece of that last year, which is pretty impressive when you think about the size and power of the overall education lobby. The piece of library aid, even if we were fully funded, even if we were at $100 million, would still be less than 0.1% of that overall state budget. It's a very teeny tiny piece of the pie, but there's a lot of people vying for it.
Thanks for that perspective, Jeremy. I think when we start talking in millions of dollars, a lot of us can't really comprehend that. We just know our own local budgets. So it's very helpful to understand that context as we begin speaking with legislators in earnest about this. And again, when we think about who are we talking to as library advocates, we have double duty we have to do right now. We have to help those we serve understand the damage that can be done by the governor's proposal, as well as make the case to elected officials. So just as we think through this, keep in mind that most people, including some people in your own organization, like trustees and friends and even staff, don't necessarily understand how libraries are funded and what a big impact the flat funding proposed by the governor could have on the library infrastructure of New York. So do take time to educate inside your organization, your staff, trustees, friends, and your everyday users who just might not understand how we make it all work. one of the big pieces of information we want more people to be talking about with their legislators is the fact that half of New Yorkers have library cards. If we think about what else half of New Yorkers agree on as being awesome, we'd be hard pressed to find something. So when you think about 10.6 million New Yorkers have library cards, which translates into half of a legislator's constituents believing in libraries, that's a great point to drive home, because any legislator, regardless of how moral and ethical they are thinking about the next election and what's going to capture the hearts and minds of the people they'd like them to vote for. Jeremy and Mike over at NYLA did an awesome job by having a new third-party poll issued last year to get us fresh data to be delivering and making us feel more confident as we move forward in our advocacy work. Some of the numbers we pulled out for you today is that 90% of those polls they favor increased state library funding. So a great way to make us feel more confident. Nobody likes asking for money, but it's important to understand you're not asking for yourself or just your library. You're asking for the people of New York, and the people want us out there helping to find this money on their behalf. Another great piece of data from that were that 92% of respondents indicate that public library services are an important part of their local education infrastructure. That means we are absolutely on the money when we say libraries are education. That's just not us bringing up the rear. That's how we are perceived by New Yorkers. Another piece of data that we always like to float out to legislators is that when taxpayers are actually given a choice to have a direct say on where their tax dollars go, 92% of the time in New York on local ballot initiatives, they vote yes to tax themselves more for library services. That is no small feat if we think about the climate we live in today, that people are conscientiously choosing to invest their hard-earned dollars in libraries is something that legislators and the governor would do well to follow suit in. So don't be shy about sharing those kinds of numbers with the people who are able to influence the outcome of the state budget. Now, Jeremy, I don't know about you, but I've been on the legislative committee for about 8 years, and it took me quite a while to figure out who is who and why I should care about some legislators who aren't serving my region. So can you give us a quick primer on who's who at the state level?
Sure thing. The top level, of course, is Governor Cuomo, and I am not going to shock anyone in saying that we're all watching and anticipating that our fine governor has aspirations to run for president, so that will make our lives interesting in 2020. And he's seen as the pretty much sure-in for his re-election bid. So the governor at the top pulling the strings, he's been a challenge for us, as we've discussed at length, with rolling back to his executive budget time and time again, and has, particularly in the Mid-Hudson region, I'm sure you're aware, has vetoed a couple of pieces of library-related legislation. So he's been a challenge. The government in the state is broken into the Senate and the Assembly, as well as the executive branch. The current Senate is controlled by the Republican Party, which is led by Senator John Flanagan from the Long Island region, and there is a power sharing agreement, which you may hear in the news on occasion, in the Senate, where the Republicans maintain the majority by working in a coalition with 7 breakaway Democrats, which refer to themselves as the Independent Democratic Caucus, the IDC. And the IDC are folks that were elected from their regions as Democrats, choose to band together in a group of 7 and then work together with the Republicans, which keeps the Republicans in charge of that chamber. This may seem like something that, maybe we don't like that, but at the end of the day, it has been the Republican majority in the Senate that has been the driving force for aid additions in library aid over the past several years. So we're grateful for their support, and it will be interesting for us to see how things shake out following this fall's elections. In the Senate, there is a select committee on libraries, I won't get you into the details, but there's a committee on libraries. It's currently chaired by Patty Ritchie, who is from the Watertown area, out near Lake Ontario, and she's picked up the mantle from Senator Hugh Farley, who chaired that committee for 4 decades. In the Assembly, we have this other balance where the Democrats are in control strongly. And Carl Heastie from the Metro represents the Democrats collectively, serving as the Speaker of the House. And Speaker of the Assembly, there is a standing committee in the Assembly Committee on Libraries and Technology. And that is currently chaired by Assemblywoman Dee Dee Barrett from the Mid-Hudson region, and she has been a fantastic advocate for libraries in her term already. So it's a little challenging for us as advocates to thread the needle between finding a way to talk about our issues that will resonate with the folks who are in power of each of these levers along the way, right? We've got Democrats in control of the Assembly, so there's a certain way to talk about our issues that are about equity and access. And then when we're talking to our representatives in the Senate, if they're Republicans, we're talking to them about job creation and how libraries serve as business incubators and return on investment and a lot more of the economic impact of libraries, and then have to wrap all that together in a way that we can get it past the governor. So a lot of moving parts and an interesting structure right now in New York State about how the power is shared around.
So you may see your systems may put meetings with John Flanagan, Patty Ritchie, Carl Heastie, and Dee Dee Barrett on your local schedule. So don't be afraid to go to those if your schedule allows for it on Advocacy Day. We love to see other people thanking these 4 key people who make good things happen for libraries. So a high five would not be out of order if you come across them. You might also want to cheer them on at the rally at noon on Advocacy Day. So just again, that reminder about who we're talking to right now as we lead into Advocacy Day and some of the things to think about. You know, you're focused on your community to help them understand, and so they might use the NYLA Online Advocacy Center or make that critical phone call or even come with us to Albany. We have a lot of people who are not library staff and trustees coming to Albany with us, but it's because someone took the time to help them understand what's going on. And then, of course, your elected officials in Albany. Before you go up there, do your homework. Check out their website. Figure out what committees they're on, what are some key hot topic issues they're very interested in, and how could you tie what's going on at your library to what they care about. The cool thing about libraries is we've got something for almost everybody. So talking about how we can help get the word out about something they care about, or provide meeting space for something they care about, or maybe we've already done that, helping them understand that we are there to amplify good works in our community, including the things they care most about. These are things to focus your energy on in a very tactical way in order to get the results we need, which are the numbers that we need to produce, both in phone call volume, messages through the Online Advocacy Center, and attendance at Advocacy Day. So Jeremy mentioned in the timeline that the legislative priority section of this doesn't really kick into high gear for the most part until after we get the budget done in April. But we want to give you a preview of the legislative priorities and make sure you feel comfortable with what they are, because it's likely they will come up in the course of conversation at Advocacy Day. So Jeremy, I'm going to let you introduce these.
Sure thing. There's really 3 top-level priorities that we have, and they roughly align to the 3 major segments of the library community that NYLA represents, right? The schools, the publics, and the academics. So first up, we have the schools, and we have a bill that's looking to ensure equitable access to school libraries and librarians. You may be surprised to learn that in New York State, there is no requirement for a school librarian in grades K through 6. Many schools already do have a school librarian available to their students, but they are not required in either the commissioner's regulations or in law. And once you hit grades 7 through 12, there is a commissioner's regulation that there be a certified school librarian, but it is also not codified in education law. So when we do see districts, and there are certain pockets within the state where there are high schools that have no school librarian, there's no mechanism for parents to come together and mount a lawsuit against the district to force their hand to provide that service. And so we're looking to rectify that, not just through in the high school, grades 7 through 12, but through a student's entire public school career, K-12, to move it into education law and require that a school provide this service. And there's certainly no shortage of research and statistics that show that students consistently score 15 to 20% higher on their 4th grade English language arts examinations when they have access to a certified school librarian. The next portion is the Taxpayer Access to Publicly Funded Research bill. If you're not familiar, the reason that there's that fun little animal on the right is that that is a taper, which is the way that we often refer to this bill, as the acronym TAPER. It's a very simple piece of legislation conceptually. What it does is it stipulates that if New York State provides funding for research, and there's three main entities, the Department of Transportation, Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Department of Health are the three big heavy hitters that send out support dollars to scientists to conduct research. If a scientist, for example, receives money from the Department of Environmental Conservation and studies owls in the Adirondacks and takes their paper and it is published in the journal Nature, what currently happens is that in order to see that journal, a library on behalf of their patrons needs to purchase access to that journal. What this bill would put in place is that after a 1-year cooling off period, we would let the publishing industry profit from the research for a year. But after that cooling off period had expired, the department that paid for the research in the first place would be required to post a copy of the research online and make it available to the residents of the state of New York at no charge. This follows a model that's currently in place in California, as well as putting it New York State in alignment with the National Institutes of Health that also have these pieces already in place. We've had some challenges with this. The publishing industry, understandably, thinks that they would like to continue to make money by charging subscriptions for access to this information. So they have made their voices heard in Albany as well, and we just need to be louder. The third item that is on our agenda is universal access to the state aid for libraries construction program. And what this does, this bill would put additional control and latitude in the implementation of the construction aid program within your system. Currently, there is flexibility to allow the systems to reduce the matching requirement from what is in the original law, which was a 50-50 split. So if you had a $100,000 renovation project, the locality had to come up with $50,000, and they could get up to $50,000 from the library construction program. There was a modification to the law a few years back that changed that and allowed the system to address economic need and would allow up to 75% of the project to be funded with state dollars, leaving the match requirement at 25%. This piece of legislation would modify the program even further and give even greater latitude to the system to determine economic need, and would allow up to 90% of a project to be funded by state dollars. This has primarily the largest potential impact for some of the smaller and rural libraries that don't really have the budget or the capacity to fundraise for a significant renovation project. And so they could, on that $100,000 renovation, still need to come up with $10,000 as opposed to $25,000. So it's an opportunity for them to have a greater ability to participate in the program.
So for those people in more rural areas of the state, you know how critical this element is to the construction grant program. So we know you'll be eloquently talking about the financial need in those areas of the state where this attribute of the program makes or breaks projects. We know smaller libraries really depend on this aspect of the program. So Jeremy, I hope you don't mind, but I threw this in because this seems to have picked up the pace in a very big way here in New York. And we just want to make sure everyone is on the same page and understands what's going on. For those of you who have not been paying attention, net neutrality, which is the idea that everyone has equal access to information online so that you don't have to pay a different rate if you want to use social media versus doing research versus doing online dating. That's been one of the hallmarks of the internet for decades. And the Federal Communications I just got that wrong, but FCC repealed net neutrality late last year, and many people are up in arms about this, including the library profession, as we take a look at both our ethical commitment to providing equal access to those that we serve to information through the internet, as well as our, I think, impinged capacity to actually pay for anything different than what we're doing right now. We've got some major concerns both on the ethical front and the affordability front. So Jeremy, I understand here in New York, there's a lot of action around this issue right now up in Albany.
There certainly is. There's currently 5 different active bills that have been introduced on this issue that have different takes on it. There's the one that we're most in support of is one that was introduced by Assemblywoman Pat Fahey. And what the state, New York, as well as a few other states, California and Montana come to mind right away, we're trying to do is force the hand of the industry to continue to operate under the concepts and ideals of net neutrality, even though the FCC has dropped the requirement. And what these bills stipulate is that if you're going to do business with any municipality or any entity that is using state dollars, that as an internet service provider, you are required to continue to have open and free flowing services that are not throttled. So it's been a good thing. It'll be certainly a bit of a challenge to figure out how that goes. And what's made the process a little more interesting is that after the bills have been introduced, Governor Cuomo put out an executive order that also stipulates that any state businesses that purchase internet services, that the providers must meet these 8-point guidelines that explain that they must be keeping to what were the net neutrality rules. And as you make your way to Albany, we will be having information about this in the packet. It's not on NYLA's formal legislative agenda, but we are anticipating that this will come up. In your meetings, the staffers and the elected officials will bring this up and ask about it because it's such a hot topic right now.
So in a second, we'll give you a link where you can learn more about this. So we definitely want it on your radar as you prepare for our Library Advocacy Day. So just to transition here, we just want to, to let you know we have faith in you because we've seen the library community come through over and over again and stepping up, getting the word out and making the case for why libraries are a good investment for state aid. But it really takes all of us pulling together on these issues to really make an impact to help other people understand what's going on in the world and how it might affect them if people are apathetic. So definitely get out there and be talking up these issues, help people connect with the advocacy tools we're about to review, and we know we can count on you for this kind of work. So we want to wrap up today with just reviewing where you can get more help. Someone asked on the chat, are you going to get these slides? Absolutely. I will follow up with everyone who's registered. You'll get the slides, a recording, and the links to the talking points we're about to talk about right now. The talking point, if you were thinking to yourself, well, Jeremy was talking, how am I ever going to remember all that? He has very helpfully written out all of the talking points related to the budget and legislative priorities we just reviewed. You can get those at nyla.org/advocacy. If your ears were pricking up as I was talking about return on investment and how libraries help communities thrive, the good folks over at the New York Library Association Sustainability Initiative have put together what I call the why behind the what talking point list. So while Jeremy's got the technical information about the asks in the budget and the data that backs that up, the Sustainability Initiative has a supplementary talking point list that can help you add some richness and local color to those talking points that bring it all home for people that need that kind of illustration. And then on the very hot topic of net neutrality, the American Library Association is the place to go to get the basics and understand the implications. So that's ala.org/advocacy/telecom/net neutrality. And again, we'll send you all those links in an email so you can just click on them and go. So we talked a bit about the talking points. We've suggested that you take a look at your legislator's website, and we want to highly encourage you to gather local statistics and stories. The stories are what bring it home for people. We're good storytellers. We have a lot of exposure to stories. And so when you're telling a story about how what you have done has made a difference in the life of someone that you serve, those are the kinds of things that people remember. So have an anecdote or two in mind to share. In particular, think about your system and how your system has helped your library provide better better service to your community, because the bulk of the dollars actually come to this system. So when you think about your taxpayers stepping up to make sure local operations go well, what would it cost you to deliver the same kind of service if the system infrastructure wasn't there? Trust me, it's a scary dollar figure. Talk about the summer reading program. That's something that everyone loves to hear about, because most people really love kids. So when you talk about how you help kids prevent the summer slide in their reading ability thanks to the work you do with the summer reading program, that's very hard to argue with in terms of why libraries matter. So again, think through those local statistics and stories to help drive home the big points that Jeremy has outlined for us here today. So of course, where you're going to do this, we've talked a variety of ways you can do this, but hitting all three is obviously best. If you can get FaceTime with your legislators, either by inviting them to your library, going to their district office, and coming to Advocacy Day in Albany with us, that's the ultimate in terms of having an impact. Calling is the next best thing. We're going to talk a little more about calling in a minute, so I'll move on here. But online is your other opportunity, and Jeremy has made it as easy as pie to actually use an online advocacy center that, as he says, just takes 2 clicks to get the word out. We want to spend a little time unpacking Advocacy Day itself for you. You've obviously got the date down. It's Wednesday, February 28th. Lots of systems are organizing rides to Albany, so you may not have to drive yourself. We will give you a high sign that parking is a pain in the tuchus when you get up there. So if someone is bringing a bus, you might want to spend the $5 or $10 to get on that bus and save yourself the headache of the drive and parking. For those of you here on the call today from Mid-Hudson, don't worry, we're not letting Kirsten drive this year. So Advocacy Day tips, these are hard-won tips. Jeremy and I are going to help you have a better day by collating this list for you. You're going to do a lot of walking. You have to go through an airport-like security checkpoint, so leave your pen knives at home, and maybe take your advocacy bling off when you go through the security line. So if you've got cool pins that say you vote and you love libraries, that kind of stuff, you're going to have to take all of that off. So you might not want to put it on until after you get through the security line. At base camp, and Jeremy explained to us what base camp is in LOB 120.
Sure. So once you make your way through the security checkpoint, you'll head off to the left, which is the Legislative Office building. You'll see some NYLA stuff set up to greet you there, and you just kind of make your way through the building and kind of keep going straight, but eventually you'll come to a ramp, and at the top of the ramp is Legislative Office Building 120, and that space is provided as a base of operations, and because you can go up 8 floors from where we are, we call it the base camp. And it's a place where you can drop off your coat. It becomes a massive pile of coats in there. But it's also a spot where you can get acclimated. It's a place where people can serve as a gathering point and meet up with your group if you're headed off to meetings. And it's the place where we'll distribute all the materials. So we try to make it super easy. So there'll be folders and materials available for all your meetings with beautiful color handouts with all the talking points in them, and charts and graphs and everything you need to help you push forward your conversation. And that's the place to check in and start your day.
Cool. So the rally, don't be shy, speak up. So when you're in your meetings, we're there to make an impression. So you let the person who's leading your meeting know you'd like to say something, and they'll make room for you as the meeting progresses. At noon, hopefully you don't have any meetings. We need as many people as possible at the well, and we're going to tell you how you can find out where the well is in just a second. But that's really the antithetical library event, where we make a lot of noise in a very public space and capture the kind of the attention and energy of that day during that event. So if you can make it to the well, that's awesome. You want to wear some crazy hats or bring some signs that really catch people's attention. That's the place to go and really find the camaraderie that I think is the summary of Advocacy Day at that event. Don't forget to get photos taken with your legislators. Those can pay off for days to come after Advocacy Day, both for sending to local newspapers, to use on social media, and to remind legislators what that smiling face looked like when we were having better times with them later on in your history with them. And while you're at it, invite your legislator to your library. They always appreciate the formal invitation, that they are welcome to come to your library, whether it be for a tour or to help out with a story time, whatever it might be. Make sure they feel welcome to come to your library after the day. Now, I'm super excited about the next thing we're going to share with you because Jeremy's done something that I think is really cool. He's actually put together a video that gives you the actual experience from when you step off the bus in Albany, walking through the concourse, going through security, finding the legislative office building, figuring out where you're going to find lunch during the day. He's done it all in a really cool 6.5-minute video that we're going to attach to the email that we send you with all the other goodies today. So if you've never been to Albany, I have to say this is super helpful to know what to expect when you get there that day because it can be a little overwhelming. So do find time in your schedule to watch that if you can. Jeremy, anything else you want to say about that video?
I will just give a tremendous hat tip to Kelsey Dorado here in the NILA office who made the video possible and did all the editing and made it what it is.
Great. So we mentioned before about calling your legislators. Of course, you're welcome to call them right now. But what we really wanted to ask you is that if you cannot make it to Advocacy Day in Albany, could you please find time that day to call the Albany office of your legislator? There's nothing better than for us that are there leading the charge when we're up in Albany to have the staff be kind of excited that we're there because they've been getting phone calls all day from people who love libraries. So if you can't go or some other library supporters in your community can't make it, have them make a phone call on Advocacy Day to the Albany office. Again, it just helps amplify the message, adds to the numbers that they see coming through the door on the topic of libraries, and it also just is funny to have the phone ringing off the hook while we're there with calls from library supporters. So Jeremy, you want to talk a little bit about this and how easy it is one more time?
Sure thing. So if you head to nyla.org/advocacy, there'll be a little graphic of a letter, and you can just click on that. It takes you right through to whatever the current letter is, and this is a screenshot of what the active letter is right now. We tweak the letters as we move through the budget negotiation process, but you click that Take Action Now button. There's a form, a simple form that you're all too familiar with if you've done anything online. Plug in your name, address, and zip code, and the system will figure out who your senator is, who your assembly member is. You don't really have to know for sure, that it knows, and it will look up their email address on your behalf, hand you a pre-drafted letter, which, by the way, you can edit if you would like to be a little more aggressive than we might have been in our letter, or even better, if you want to add specific details about your library and how that impacts your life. It'll make the letter stand out. The staff members do realize that this is a form letter pretty quickly as they get the same letter again and again. So the tweaks that you make to the letter are bonus advocacy points. And feel free to grab that link when you get to this letter and share it, right? Because the more people we can get to take action, the better, and pass that around through your social media channels.
Social media has become so critical in this effort over the past few years. So we want to make sure everyone's using the same hashtag, which is NILA-LAD for Library Advocacy Day 18. So tag all your pictures for the day, tag when you're pushing out calls to action to get more people to come to the online advocacy center. It really helps Jeremy and the staff to see what's working and where we're capturing the most attention. It's also critical when you're tagging your legislators to also use that tag so they start to see that it's not just the faces in their office and the voices on their phone, but it's the people who are watching on social media, which can highly influence their reaction to our messaging. This year, for the first time statewide, we've rolled out the Real People, Real Dollars campaign. If you're not familiar with this is what it can look like and what it's looked like at the Mid-Hudson Library System over the past 2 years. This has been incredibly successful for here in Mid-Hudson, and I know a lot of you are trying it this year in your communities as well. The idea here is that we're asking just everyday people to calculate how smart they are while using their local library. So by using the NILA Value Use Calculator on the NILA website, which we'll give you the link to, they can calculate approximately how much they save on an annual basis by using the library. And when we compare those real dollars that people can very much relate to from their own household budgets to the amounts of money we're asking for in Albany, it hits home so much quicker for people. So again, getting down to that local story, that individual story, this helps us get there. And really, this can help you with your local budget referendums or any other local initiatives you're doing at the county level, not just for state advocacy. So it's pretty useful all year round, we've found. Jeremy, I saw that you helped us out again this year. For people like me who are not awesome at Twitter.
Yeah, on the NYLA website, you'll find a virtual advocacy page, which is populated with a slew of pre-written tweets, right? Because before the character limit increased, it was even more challenging to cram everything you wanted to get across in a set number of characters. So there's a whole deck of pre-written ones there that you literally can just copy and paste into your Twitter account and hit send, and it just keeps the driving the traffic up. And there's that bit.ly in there. You're familiar with those. It's a condensed link that will take folks right into the action and help them take action for library aid. And in addition, on that same virtual page, there's some graphics you can grab too. You can change your Facebook profile picture to the library champion, or add that up on your library's website if you're able as well.
Thanks for making that so easy for us, Jeremy. I think if you haven't gotten it by now, now is the time for us to be speaking up. You don't have to wait for Advocacy Day on the 28th. Getting the word out now and helping others understand why this is so critical is really important. Jeremy and the staff have done an awesome job of pulling together all these resources that we need to be effective here. So almost everything we've talked about today can be found at nyla.org/advocacy. Again, we'll send you the live links in a follow-up email after today's webinar. So you can click on these and get right to the resources that we've pointed out on the call today. We just wanted to end by, again, thanking you for your time today. We've seen over and over again that your voice matters. So just imagine if you could amplify your efforts a dozen times over by inspiring others to speak up as well. We can make a difference if we all pull together on this one. We've proven it before. We know we can do it again. And it really takes people like you to make it happen. So again, thank you for stepping up. We so appreciate your work as a library advocate here in New York. We just want to sign off by saying thank you so much for what you do. We know you have a choice in how you spend your time and energy, and it means a lot to all of us that you choose to do it for libraries.
Couldn't agree more.